Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us and welcome back to SocietyCast, our virtual speaker series aimed at facilitating inspiration, insights, and innovation amongst all of you, our network. I'm your host. My name is Yanni Lubis, Vice President of the Alumni Society, and I'm coming to you from my home here in Chicago. Now, to kick off, I'm seeing this already, but I want to encourage you all to use the live chat here on the right-hand side, share where you're joining us from, and say hello. Let us know if you can see and hear us okay as well. Now, in a moment, I'll bring up our speakers, but before I do that, I do just want to run through a few housekeeping items first and share a little bit about how our session is going to go today. So first, we're going to have about 25 minutes with our speakers, followed by an interactive Q&A session with all of you. And then because this is a special edition of SocietyCast, we are going to migrate over to Zoom for an energizing 30-minute networking session to continue the conversations, get to know your fellow members, and also our partners at Facebook. So now back to the program here. There are two main ways to ask your questions today. So you can submit a question at any time using the Ask a Question feature, which is just located here at the bottom of the screen. Pro tip, if someone has a question that is similar to yours, you can actually just go ahead and upvote that question and raise it to the top for you. In addition, I'll be monitoring the chat box, so if that's easier for you, feel free to use the chat box as well. So let's go ahead and invite our speakers to join me. Hi, Carl. Hi, Chessie. Everyone, I want to introduce you to our speakers today. First, Carl Bernadotte, who leads executive recruiting for Facebook's Global Marketing Solutions and Consumer Marketing Businesses. Global Marketing Solutions is led by Facebook's Chief Revenue Officer and encompasses all monetization activities for the company. And consumer marketing is then led by the Chief Marketing Officer. And today, Carl is going to be interviewing Alumni Society member Francesca de Quesada Covey, otherwise known as Chessie. And Chessie works on strategic response at Facebook's CEO and COO's office. She has led numerous teams during her tenure at Facebook responsible for partnerships and business development of new products. In her previous role, Chessie launched and scaled small business tools, including the international jobs product, served as head of platform partnerships in Latin America, and worked on internet.org. Before joining Facebook, Chessie served as deputy counselor for strategic engagement to Valerie Jarrett, senior advisor to President Obama. So very honored to have you both with us today. Excited to hear the conversation. And with that, Carl, the floor is yours, and I'll just be back to close. Enjoy.
Welcome, and we're so excited to be here. Chessie, I am excited for this conversation, and let's just kick it off. That was a mouthful of our bios, but I'd love to hear a little bit about, your career journey that led you ultimately here at Facebook.
So it's great to be here. Thank you everyone for making the time. We were joking, I was joking before we started that this feels like the first event that I'm attending in a really long time. So I'm just really excited to see all of you. We see the chat, and it's so fun to see people from Chicago and from Jersey City and from Philadelphia and Mountain View. It feels like we're all connected. So I joined Facebook 7 years ago now, which feels like a lifetime ago. And the reason that I joined Facebook is, for me, I'm really interested in how technology can help issues of income inequality and provide ladders of opportunity. And so I've always focused on sort of the products that we are building in that sphere. And I come from a background in both government and before government, really thinking about that tie between what the government is able to provide and how the private sector works. And that has really led me to think about different opportunities and think about the best ways that I can, at Facebook, be driving forward our mission with that lens.
Terrific. And if I would answer that question for myself, I think I have had a career in executive search. It's been an amazing ride, but I always found that when I was on the agency side, I was missing that follow-up when you're working internally, elbow to elbow with the folks that you've hired. And I remember after my first corporate gig, which was working at NBC Universal and building the executive search team there, that somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, you should be working at Facebook." And at the time, I remember thinking, Facebook, like, don't they only hire engineers? But there's such a wealth of things. And as mentioned in my bio, I support primarily the office of our CRO and the office of our CMO. And it's been an amazing ride just to see the evolution of this company and of products that we use day to day, and hiring kind of the best and the brightest, right? And I totally agree with what you said, Jesse, about that intersection of community and what a company can bring to bear on that. So that's a little bit about my background. I'd love to get, I think one of the most important things in anyone's career are folks that open the door for you, right? Whether those folks are mentors or sponsors. How have mentors and sponsors played a role in your career?
That's a really good question. And I think it's a tough one because we talk in conversations like this, we talk about mentorship and sponsorship, but no one generally defines what that means. And so for me, just to take a step back and sort of think about how I define it, a mentor is somebody for me that is helping me navigate tough questions, that always has a door open and time on their calendar, and is willing to listen to me vent if that's what I need, but mostly is a really important sounding board for how to achieve my goals and that is in the mentorship relationships that I've established, it's both personally and professionally, so that there is a clear understanding. There's especially in the ways that we're all working right now during COVID, but before that also, there is a blending of personal and professional, and you need to have goals on both. So really having those conversations and having a sort of holistic understanding of what it is that I'm trying to achieve and what drives me and what my ambitions are. And a sponsor for me is somebody that has a position at the table where you want to go, or a table where you're already sitting, and that bangs on the table for you. So they make space for you in a way that is very active. And they are constantly sort of thinking how to make space for you. And I have had the good fortune of having both, of people sort of that I riff off of and learn from their experience, and where they have been able to accomplish things in their career and their professional life that I think are really motivating, and that really align with objectives that I have for myself. And so I set up, just getting very much now more into the weeds, just very tactically, I set up quarterly meetings with them. I track the conversation that we're having. I try to make sure that I'm connecting with them and thinking about feedback. And then for the sponsors, it's the same thing, but just making sure that we're constantly thinking about, that I'm constantly keeping them a little bit more updated and more abreast of sort of the ongoings in my career and in my personal life. And I think that the more you're able to be, at Facebook, we talk about authenticity a lot. And the more that you're able to be authentic in the conversations with your mentors and sponsors, the more they're able to really think about the opportunities that they're bringing and opening up for you.
I love that. The one thing I would add to that is, like, I think also mentors, maybe they start as somebody that was at a company that you looked up to, right? But over time, you can keep the same mentor. The mentor doesn't have to be at the company that you're sitting in now, whereas the sponsor does, right? Because as you mentioned, the sponsor is that person that's in the rooms where you're not, and is advocating for your ability, for your readiness for that next opportunity. That's great. What do you think, as a member of an underrepresented community, and I would say in your experience in particular, what challenges have you faced, and how have you overcome those challenges?
So I'm Cuban from Miami. I'm very proudly Cuban from Miami. And I'm a woman in the workplace. And sometimes there are lots of, when I'm looking back at my career, I came in with a deficit gap of basic language to begin with that is used in corporate America, because growing up I wasn't exposed to some of those sort of ideas that people that have parents that were in corporate America were exposed to. And when I think about sort of coming from an underrepresented community, one of the things that I think about is how do we create that knowledge and shorten and close that knowledge gap on just the basics of how corporate America works. And very simply from like, what is an HR department supposed to do and how do they represent folks or not, to what does, how do ERGs work? Like and also coming from not coming from corporate America to Facebook, which since I've joined went from a company of less than 5,000 people to now a company of massive scale. The company has grown in ways that I just didn't have the contextualization in the background for. And I have actually found that challenging. And when I talk to friends that come from other communities, they had a basic understanding of that. Their parents were talking at the table about, HR's function, or the people in their network were talking about issues, I don't know, corporate issues and how they would affect it, or stock prices and the valuation of companies. Those weren't conversations that we were having at my dinner table. And I'm blessed with my incredible family, but my mom was working for a very, very small company. My dad worked for a really small company too. And so it was just a different perspective. So I think that for me, one of the biggest challenges has been that contextualization and that basic language gap. And one thing that I've done is that I take notes. And when I first joined Facebook, I mean, you were talking about Facebook only hires engineers. When I first joined Facebook, there was not only that sort of corporate gap, there was also that engineering gap. I had no idea what the engineers were talking about. And we would go to meetings and I would swear that like we were talking two different languages. And the truth is we were. And so I would keep a notebook where I would write all these terms, and then I would go home and Google them in order to understand, like basic terms of what we were doing, and just enough to find my groove. And then finding people, I think allyship is really important. And allyship is not just people representing groups, it's people representing people. And so having somebody that I knew on the engineering side could be an ally and would say, hey, I don't know that this term is something that, somebody on partnerships would understand. Can we take a step back and explain that term so that we're all so that we all have the same reference? And I found that so helpful and so incredibly generous. And for me, that was really a sort of turning point in my exploration of corporate America and an engineering heavy company.
I love that. And I think for everyone listening, the allyship component, and by the way, that's not just allies of either a different race or the majority group, right? Like the other thing I think you were gonna say it at one point are like FBR, like I say FBRGs because that's what we call them, but ERGs, employee resource groups, and the ability to find community there where folks have either struggled with the same thing and now have overcome those things and can lead the way and show others and bring others along, even creating things like buddy systems, right? But it is important that sometimes I think as underrepresented individuals, we come in with that gap. And finding ways, as you said, whether it's study at night, whether it's FBRGs or allyship, finding those opportunities to really help close that gap as quickly as possible. Because the other thing is not all companies give you that ramp time that you need to become versed in being successful. There's being successful at the function, which hopefully you're coming with a base knowledge of, but there's also being successful at the company, and company culture plays a very important part in that. You've noted now your roots, right? I wonder if you think about authenticity and Facebook and your cultural roots. How have you brought that to work? How has that been manifested in your ability to bring your authentic self to work?
That's a great question. So first, all the work that I do, I think about my experience first. We work on a consumer platform. So when I'm thinking about the partnerships that we should drive or the opportunities that we have for alignment, I think the way that I engage with the platform first. And we happen to work at obviously a social network. And so my experience is heavily rooted in my community, because when I'm looking at my Instagram, at my Facebook, at my WhatsApp, I am seeing the content from my family, notably in Miami and in Latin America. And I have a very deep perspective there. And so I try to bring that into all the conversations that I'm having. In the roles that I've had at Facebook, one of the things that I've tried to do is really focus on how we can bring more connectivity and more opportunity to Latin America and to the Latinx population. And so one of the big pushes that we did around internet.org was really thinking through how we could bring internet to South and Central America. On the jobs product, we launched it targeting the Latinx community, or not targeting the Latinx community, but with the Latinx community really top of mind, and really thinking about the use case that the Latinx community presents, which is a different use case than other communities. And I try to always bring that perspective. So I don't hesitate to say, I am proudly from Miami. I am proudly Cuban American. And I want to make sure that people know that, and people know that that is my perspective, and that it is not, I don't bring the perspective that somebody sitting only in Silicon Valley would bring. And I want to make sure that I'm opening that up as much as possible. The other thing that I would say, though, that is really, really important and that I've learned at Facebook is that it has to be done through data. So it always starts with me personally, where I say, like, my Thea is posting this and I want to understand why, and I want to understand this behavior and what it is that I'm seeing. But then I do the analytical, I do the analysis and I have the rigor to say, is this a one-off, or is this something that I can really bubble up to the company? And what I found is that by bubbling it up and saying, these are the data points to what I'm seeing, people are excited and they want to learn more, and they want to take the opportunity to do the best that we can for the greatest possible community and for all the communities that are represented on our platform.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I have one more question, and then get your questions ready, audience, because we're going to go to some audience questions. One is, I always love this question because it's so varied by personal experience. What is the either one or two single best pieces of advice you've received in your professional career?
So Cecilia Munoz recently did a talk. Cecilia Munoz is a friend from the White House. Friend and mentor from the White House. She served as the Domestic Policy Council Director under the Obama administration. And so she was responsible for, and I'm sorry, the baby monitor is going off. So if you guys could hear the baby, I'm sorry about that. Working from home has its challenges.
This is the normal of working from home. You're all good.
So she served as the director of the Domestic Policy Council. And so she was responsible for all policy that was coming out of the White House. And some of that policy really affected the Latino community, and some of that policy was lauded, and some of that policy was tough and met a lot of resistance. And she says two things. One, you need to be clear on what your North Star is, what gives you energy, and why you're doing the work that you're doing. So always make sure that that is sort of top of mind and that that's driving you forward. And the second thing that she says is that we're all going to make really, really tough choices in our career, and we need to get our love at home. And that really resonated with me, because we're not always making really easy decisions. Especially as leaders in the company, where everyone is going to agree with us. And so this idea of having family central to balance the tough days is really important. So that way, when you come to work, you can be really objective and not over pivot. First, we work at a place where we are lucky to have awesome people, where you over pivot away from the data or away from your instinct because you want to just please everyone. And so really getting your love at home is the way that she talks about it. And I thought that was really important. So like having your North Star and feeding your soul through the outside. To me, it spoke about that work-life balance in a way that I was finally able to grasp onto it, because when people say work-life balance, I'm like, yeah, oh, that sounds great. But like, I wasn't able to,
in theory,
to really understand it until she said it that way. And so that really resonated with me. She has this great book out about lessons for people of color and minorities and in her career. And I just highly recommend it because she also has a few other jewels.
Terrific. Okay, we're going to go to the questions. And the very first question is, how did you find your mentors and sponsors? And how do you get them? How do you ask your sponsor to advocate for you? From Gabriella.
That's a great question, Gabriella. Thank you. So I think that you need to be, the way that I found my mentors and sponsors is by trying to find people that have similar interests. We're lucky at Facebook where we have this really dynamic internal workplace tool, which is very similar to Facebook, the Facebook that you all use, but it's just one for inside the company. And so you're able to look people up based on topics or based on projects. And then setting up time with them, learning more about them, who their goals are, and then finding when there is opportunity to sort of align, being really clear about what it is that I'm interested in, really clear about where I want to use my time, and then finding people that are interested in that as well. And so it's been organic. I've never been the type of person that goes to an event and says, will you mentor me? Because that's not organic. That's not authentic to me. It may work for you. And if it does, awesome. But a mí me da mucha pena. Like I don't have the ability to do that. And so for me, it has to be a little bit slower and a little bit more based on those conversations that you have where you find out that this person has those similar interests and that this person, and ways that you can connect with people. And so it's a little bit slower probably than going to a networking event and being able to find a mentor that way. And then I'm just super clear. Like I'm just somebody that is very direct. Honestly, to the question of sort of heritage and who you are, I have a very hard time hiding how I feel about things. It's a blessing and a curse from being Cuban. And so I'm just very direct with people about what it is that I'm looking for. I will say that it is something that I have had to learn through a lot of effort and a lot of grit to modulate a little bit better. Because
it's challenging, right? It is. For, like you did say, for better or worse. I think sometimes it totally works to your advantage. I'm a fan, and I think a lot of people are a fan of saying like, hey, you know what you're getting with this person, but then I think the same point, you're not going to be everybody's cup of tea, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And so like knowing how to moderate that is important. But then just being super direct. I think that especially right now where people are so strapped for time and, our most valuable resource is time and the energy that we have, and people are just really strapped. I think people appreciate directness. Saying, I am here because of this, and I would like your guidance on this.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. The next question, which if you don't mind, I'll take a first crack at it, which is, what are tips for getting more participation from ERGs? I would say that what I tend to find in my career are ERGs, you have the most junior people at the company being part of them, and then you have a lot of executive sponsors. And there's really not much engagement in the middle. So one of the things that I've seen for our ERGs at Facebook specifically is we've worked on getting more folks in the middle. And one of the ways we drive that is ERGs can sometimes end up pivoting towards like the fun social activities. And I think that needs to be balanced with a lot of professional development activities. And what I found is, like, I'm one of the leaders for the Black FBRG in our New York office where I sit. And when I invite some of our more senior leaders to an event where they can talk about their career experience or some specific professional development area, they are more likely to say yes than I say, hey, we're going to be doing a happy hour or this event, right? So I think it's thinking about the level of engagement and what's important to that audience that you're trying to engage with to really fill in that middle so that you don't have everybody that's junior at the company and then just senior executive sponsors, but you're filling out the middle with programming that works for folks at all levels of their career. Chessie, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add to that.
I think that's right. The only other thing that I would add is one evolution that I've seen at Facebook over the last few years is a push to ensure that engagement in ERG is recognized as something valuable to the company. And so too much of the time being in ERG seems like a nice to have or like something that people do in their free time. But that's not actually true. It's about fostering community and about making the company the strongest that it can with the most diverse voices that are engaged at all levels, and pushing leadership to acknowledge that it is a company priority and it is something that is valued in the moments where people are calibrating what is valued.
I love that. The next question, I believe you already answered. How do you leverage your Latino roots on your job? So Nadia, thank you for that question. We addressed it. Jumping down to the following one is, thank you both for your time. What advice would you give professionals seeking to transition from a different industry like financial services to Facebook? Again, I'm happy to take that one, Chessie, if you'd prefer, but you've also made the transition from, public service to private industry, so.
I mean, there's so many opportunities at Facebook. The company is constantly evolving. I would talk to people. I would try to find people on the teams. I don't know, but Carl, this is your expertise. So I will leave this to you.
So this is from Luis. Lewis, one of the things I would say is I go back to kind of like core skill, right? And maybe you don't know this, but for example, in one of the teams I lead, we have verticals. We sell into companies, right? So we have advertisers that advertise on our platform. Well, financial services is one of those areas. So to support that ecosystem, not only do we have sales roles into financial services companies, but we also have planning teams that are looking out 3-5 years ahead to say, what will the financial service landscape look like 3 to 5 years ahead? And there's where we hire folks that would have, for example, financial service expertise, so that we can bring those folks along that understand the industry to help us look ahead at how we can build products to support those kind of industries. So ultimately, I think it is going back and indexing on what you do well, so that you can say, hey, I do this well. Maybe Facebook has a department division that is focused on this or is paying attention to this, and I might be able to make that pivot. The other pivot, which is a whole other rabbit hole that I'll just mention briefly, is potentially going back to school and getting something like an MBA. If you're making a pivot from an industry that you're into an industry that you want to be, and you don't have any of the required core skills, going back to school and getting something like an MBA can be very, very helpful. Okay, we're going to take one more because we are going to go to these breakout rooms in a second. Do you have any suggestions on how to break into Facebook? I've sent like 50 applications for jobs, and I am perfect, and I have not gotten an interview. And that's from also Nadia. I'll take this one if you don't mind. Nadia, I would say I am surprised that you've had 50 applications, because we actually limit our applications to 3. So after you've submitted 3 active applications, it'll normally stop you. But I understand what you're saying is that you've been trying for some time. And one of the things I always say to candidates is that getting a role at any company, not just Facebook, is where your skills line up with the right opportunity. Because you believe that you're reading a position description that you're right for a role. And I would strongly recommend that when you look at a job description, you make sure you fit most of those criteria. I think that's very important and very valuable. But I also think that you also have to understand that of those criteria, if we list 5 to 15 of them, maybe only 3 or 4 of them are really, really core to doing the job. So it is having patience, continuing to apply, And also making a personal connection. Going back to something Chessie was talking about when she was talking about mentors and sponsors, I really believe there are three professional networks that we all belong to. It's like the school that you went to, the opportunity that the school that you went to, the professional networks that you belong to, like the Alumni Society, etc., that make all of the difference. And you need to tap into folks that are in those to potentially refer you to opportunities. And those might be better ways of getting in and trying to get more engagement for your background. But it really has to be that intersection of where your background meets the need, and you just have to be patient. I have had candidates that I've been working with for 2+ years before they finally landed a role at Facebook. So that's it for our Q&A. And if you don't mind, can I just ask, we do this at Facebook all the time. We have this super lightning round. It's kind of, how do you get to know someone? So Chessie, here are my lightning round questions for you. Morning person or night owl?
Night owl.
Caramel or peanut butter?
Peanut butter.
Home cooked meal or dining out?
Home cooked meal from my husband. If I'm responsible for it, dining out 100% of the time.
Love that. Tropical paradise or winter wonderland?
Tropical.
And lastly, this is probably the toughest one. If you guys heard in the beginning, Chessie supports both Cheryl, our CEO, our COO, and Mark, our CEO. Cheryl or Mark?
I can't answer that. This is recorded.
All right, well, that is it. Back over to you.
Thank you so much. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Chessie. That was amazing. So if you want to see this again, for everybody tuning in, the replay will be available. And if you want to share these insights at Careers at Facebook with your networks, please do. Before we head over to the next portion of the event, I do quickly want to plug and share that we will have the next installment of this special edition with Facebook in 2 weeks, October 1st. Featuring Francisco Varela, who is Vice President of Mobile and Connectivity Partnerships, and Leo Olebe, Global Director of Games Partnerships. And we'll share that link after this event as well if you'd like to join. But now it's time to go into the networking portion of this event. So there is a link here at the bottom. It says link to networking session. We're going to go migrate over to Zoom. And it's an opportunity to meet fellow members here that have tuned in today, meet our partners, and meet each other. So looking forward to it. And we'll see you in Zoom momentarily. Thank you both for this discussion. Take care.